Hello, welcome. Hope you're all doing well today. Thank you so much for joining us for another innovation skills workshop. And today we have the amazing Sally Charles, who's going to explore how you can be more than a mind reader and some of the importance of creativity and design thinking in coming up with ideas. So maybe you want to be an entrepreneur, or maybe you just want to come up with something more innovative to solve a frustrating problem. And hopefully you'll get some tips and tools to take you through that process with you today. So over to you, Sally, to get us started with the presentation.
Thank you, Edward. So because you have taken time out to come and join us today, and it's your lunchtime, we're going to start off with a story. And in traditional style, if you're sitting comfortably, I shall begin. So I'm going to tell you the story of Epaminondas, and it's actually taken from a book that was a real favourite of mine when I was a child. So the attribution is at the bottom of the screen there for the book that I read, and from the illustrations are taken from that book. The text is a little bit abbreviated, so bear with me on that. So Epaminondas lived with his mother. The house was on one side of the hill and his grandmother was on the other side. Epaminondas would go to visit. Do you know, I cannot actually read the screen because everything is all covered all over it, so I can't actually read my own text. To visit his grandmother on the other side of the hill. So let's hope I can remember the text. His grandmother would always bake treats for Epaminondas when he went to visit. One day she gave him freshly baked cake to take home to his mother. Epaminondas held the cake tightly and set off home to his mother. When he got home, Epaminondas presented the cake to his mother, but all that were left were some sticky crumbs. His mother told him that the way to carry cake was to wrap it in leaves, put it under his hat, and come along home. Sometime later, Epaminondas visited his grandmother, and she gave him some freshly made butter to take home. Epaminondas carefully wrapped it in leaves and put it under his hat, just as his mother had told him. And then he walked home in the heat of the day. When he got home, Epaminondas was dripping in butter. His mother told him that the way to carry butter was to wrap it in leaves, but to cool it in the running water of a stream, then take it home. Some while later, Epaminondas visited his grandmother again, and she gave him a puppy. Just as his mother had told him, he carefully wrapped it in leaves, cooled it in the running water of a stream, and then carried it home. The poor puppy was shivering and had to be dried by the fire. Epaminondas' mother scolded him and said that he should have known that a puppy should be on a lead to be taken home. So when he next visited his grandmother and she gave him a loaf of bread to take home, he carefully tied a string lead around the loaf and walked it home. So that is actually where we're going to leave Epaminondas, because you've probably got the gist of this story. Each time he takes home a new present, he's following the instructions he got previously. And of course, it's, according to his mother, completely the wrong thing to do. So I wanted to, many of you may already have seen Bloom's taxonomy. This is about the stages of learning. And this is a hierarchy, and it starts with remembering, understanding, and applying. And I think this is pretty much as far as Epaminondas got. He remembered what he'd been told, he understood it to a certain extent, and he applied it to the next occasion that became available. But what he wasn't doing was some of these higher order activities. He didn't analyze the situation, evaluate it, and he certainly wasn't being very creative with what he was doing. So when we are thinking about creating innovation and about creating new things, there is a process that has been established called design thinking, which actually helps you with these higher order steps. And I'm going to show you how that works. And you've often probably been told to think outside the box if you're going to start thinking about creating something new. So this tool will help you do that. So these are the 5 stages of design thinking. And we start on the left-hand side with empathy or empathizing. And then we want to define what the problem is. And then we go through the process of ideation, prototyping, and testing. Easy. So off you go, that's it. So I think what we need to do, though, is dig in a little bit deeper. What are these stages and what is actually happening here? So part of the first stage is actually to move away from the product or process that we're thinking about creating and actually move towards a much more person-centric approach, which will actually help us with that design process so that the design actually fits with the people who need to use the product or service. And I'm just going to take the first 3 steps here of that design thinking process. And I think that they link totally directly to those 3 higher order stages of Bloom's taxonomy. So empathy is helping you analyze something from somebody else's perspective. Evaluation and defining, they're all about getting to the root of the problem. And then creation, which is the highest order of the thinking, is around ideation. It's another word for the same thing. So I think that these 3 steps link to Bloom's taxonomy. So I want to have a look at empathizing and some techniques for empathizing. And this is all about getting inside someone else's head. So there are lots of ways of doing that. You can interview the person, but you need to be careful with your interview techniques to make sure you find out what's really going on. So rather than do a survey, sit down and interview them using open questions so that you are inviting them to talk and allowing them to give you their opinion. Another technique for this is using 5 whys. Just keep saying why, like children do. Why? So every time they give you an answer, you want to add another why into that conversation so that you really delve deeply into what is going on and why it's happening. Another technique, I'm actually going to skip over these and go right down to the bottom. Observation. So observe people doing the things that you're interested in understanding and ask yourself why they're doing them. And question your assumptions about why they're doing what they're doing to see if you can really get inside their head. Observe patterns of behavior. And again, ask yourself, why are they doing this? What is it that they're experiencing and what are they trying to achieve? And a final tool is emulation. Once you feel that you have sort of understood what someone else's experience is in the situation, see if you can emulate them. I did an exercise as part of an IDEO course that I took. And IDEO is an organization in America that is very much linked with design thinking, and they do a lot of consultation and innovation thinking. And they ran this course around getting into other people's heads and sort of working out what's going on and as part of the design thinking process. So emulation is about trying to walk in the steps of somebody else. And so the particular example one of the examples they gave, which was the one I used, was to take some dark glasses and to smear some hand cream or something like that on the dark glasses so that you are making it more difficult to see through the dark glasses, and then try navigating around spaces that you're not particularly familiar with. And the emulation there is around trying to understand what is happening with somebody who is visually impaired and how your thinking and priorities change totally during that process. And it was, I was about to say eye-opening experience, probably not the right expression, but it certainly gave me insight into what's going on in that situation. And insight is a word to hold on to because that is what you're trying to achieve. So moving on to the define box, we've got Einstein up here on the right-hand side because we often refer to him when we're talking about defining the problem. because he famously said that if he were asked to solve a problem and he was given an hour to do it, he would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and 5 minutes solving it, because he felt that very much checking that you have defined the problem appropriately will lead you to creating a good solution to the problem. And as I mentioned earlier, evaluating the insights that you've achieved and gained through that empathy process will help you in defining the real problem. And then I'm going to move on to the ideation phase. And I think it's all very well to have a process around design thinking, but this ideation phase, I think, is really crucial. And to actually understand the sort of mindset and the journey that's required if you're going to be creative in finding solutions. And freeing your mind is very much what you need to do. So sort of dropping your own way of thinking prior to this and seeing where that takes you. There are a whole raft of ideation techniques that are over on the right-hand side there. I'm not actually going to go into them. I'm sure we'll be sharing this, and they're a good signpost. You can look these up on the internet and get a lot more about them. And I'm going to create a glossary so that maybe we can share that later as part of this. Another way of expressing or showing the design thinking process is in this double diamond approach. And if you sort of take it from the left-hand side and sort of follow through to the right-hand side, the left-hand side where you're empathizing, if you imagine that you have started with a very narrow pinpoint view of the situation, and what you're doing on that left-hand side is opening up your thinking, like the open arms of that side of the diamond, totally opening up your thinking to what's going on. And then through the definition phase, you are closing that thinking down again to pinpoint what the problem is. And then as you move on to the right-hand side of the diagram, the ideation phase, the purpose of that is to totally open up your thinking and really include all sorts of thinking that you might not previously have engaged with, in order to really come up with some possibly wacky ideas, but sometimes the wacky ideas are the ones that can really take you into interesting places. And then the final steps of the design thinking process are to prototype your idea and test it. And to do this as quickly as possible and get lots of feedback from the users that you've been working with, the people who you've been empathizing with in the first place, to really get a handle on whether you have fully understood their situation, how good has your empathy been, how good has your definition of the problem been, and is your solution really solving it for them? So prototype it, test it, and when you've got some really good data back, you can move on to creating a good version of your prototype. So I'm going to look a little bit more around the ideation phase. Creativity is what ideation is all about. And we often use what we call the design squiggle. I've slightly modified this because what I wanted to talk about was when you approach a problem, you might have some quite fixed ideas about that problem. So that's that straight line at the left-hand side. And what you really need to achieve if you're going to be really creative is this jumble, creative mess, because you're trying to get to a place that you didn't exactly know where you're going. And then you're going to come out the other side of this with a slightly changed idea, possibly, hopefully, some clarity around what that is. But you have to go through this slightly uncomfortable process of not really knowing where you're going. And sometimes you might end up doubling back on yourself before you really get to the answer that you're looking for. So this is the process of creativity. And people need help in addressing this and achieving this state of mind. So we're going to have a look at that. So we've already talked about empathy. So empathy is one lens through which you can be helped to be creative and to ideate. And the lens that you're looking through when you get into the state of empathy is seeing the world through someone else's eyes. But there are other lenses that you can use to be creative and to come up with ideas. Diversity is another one, and the ability to see the world through a multiplicity of experiences, not just one other person's experiences, but a really broad range of experiences, can lead to some really interesting innovation. Another lens is recombinant innovation. Now, Chris Moule, who's head of EIG, has done an amazing TED talk on this, and the link is here. So I'm not going to get into this a lot, but basically what this is about is combining other ideas that already exist. So check out his talk because it's really worth having a look at. And then the last one I've got on here is some cross-sector or multidisciplinary, combining the knowledge of and expertise to bring things into a new context. And I've got a link here at the bottom, and I'm going to go on and explore some of the ideas that were at this link in the next couple of slides. So on the left-hand side is an MRI machine, and this is an image that's very familiar with everybody in the EIG team because it's an example that we use a lot in the work that we do. And what's happened here is it was very upsetting for children to be put into that very dull clinical MRI machine. So the solution that they came up with was to decorate it and create a story around that so that it engaged the minds of the children in a different way and stop scaring them. And then you can see across the screen here, there are some other examples. So the carousel that we're all familiar with in airport lounges has been used in a food and drink context here in a sushi bar to convey the sushi elements around the restaurant so that people can pick things up as they want. And then we have the familiar egg box, which I don't remember a world without an egg box, so it's been around for a very long time. But obviously that idea has then been changed to create some packaging for other fragile items. Here again in food and drink, we've got some wine bottles packaged with something that's not exactly an egg box, it's been taken from that idea. And the landing equipment, the wheels for an aircraft, were the inspiration for this very updated children's buggy, which is much more maneuverable than some of the prams that I remember from my childhood. And there are lots of other examples on that website that you can have a look at. And if you look at cross-industry innovation, if you put that into a Google search, you'll come up with a lot more than these ones. And then another one that is again from that link that I've given you. I thought this was very interesting. The suggestion here is that the drive-through takeaway is actually coming from the technology that's been developed in Formula One to make that pit stop as short as possible so that the drivers can get back out on the track. And not mentioned on this website, but I was aware of this in another context, was that actually doctors have learnt from this. So in operations, rather than a single surgeon operating for the entire operation on a patient, multiple surgeons and teams can be brought in to operate so that much more can get done much more quickly and that the patient is under anesthetic for as short a time as possible. And these doctors actually had the McLaren team in to help them with this. So that knowledge came directly from Formula One, and they had those specialists in to help them with that. And then this is another piece of innovation that you can see is coming from a different source. And innovation from nature is another lens that you might want to have a think about. Here, this instance is actually looking at how a hive will communicate with each other. I think it's quite similar to something that you see with starlings when they fly in the sky. They all seem to know what they're all doing, and they seem to act as one. And what is happening here, this innovation, is instead of things within a building operating in isolation so that systems can be operating all at the same time, and actually multiple things can be happening that don't need to happen, what they're looking at doing is putting in a system where all of the systems that are in operation are actually acting with the knowledge of other systems, and it is cutting down the energy consumption in a building because things are not duplicating. So this is, again, something that has been learned from nature. So what I wanted to encourage you to think about was, is Epaminondas being stupid when he applies the learning that he took from a previous occasion to a new situation? Not necessarily, I don't think so. He might actually come up with something new and innovative by doing that. And I think it's important to retain the creative playfulness that children often have, because it leads them into new learning, it leads them into creating new ideas. And this idea of shutting down that thinking, and of his mother scolding him and telling him that he shouldn't be so stupid, that he should do it the way that it's always been done. This very interesting speaker, who I've put up the link to on the other side of the screen here, this is Sir Ken Robinson, and he has done some really interesting TED Talks about creativity and how it can be killed by some of the process of formalized learning, which tells you that you shouldn't be doing things in a certain way, but you should stick to the knowledge that we already have. And just thinking back to Einstein again, another quote that we like from him very much is that we're not going to solve the problems that we have in the world by using the same thinking that created them. So design thinking, creativity, and Epaminondas. And if you're interested in the whole story of Epaminondas, I found this link on YouTube, so you can actually go and hear the full story if you follow that link. And so that's my talk on design thinking and creativity. And I wonder if anybody who's here has any questions.
A round of applause, Sally Charles. Thank you so much. So this is your opportunity to ask any questions, either in the chat or by speaking out loud. Hopefully you've got some tools and techniques that will inspire you to go out there and be creative, come up with ideas. Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions coming up. So if you, as always, have questions, then please do get in touch with us and yeah, pop them in the chat. The recording and the slides for today's session will be uploaded and sent out to you, and it'll go on the Entrepreneurship Toolkit. As we mentioned, we're the Entrepreneurship and Innovation team. And if you are looking to develop a new solution, whether you've just got a frustration that you want to solve a problem to, or like Epaminondas, you keep being told you're doing the wrong thing and you just want to find a different solution, then we're able to help. Fantastic. We have a question from Derek here. Does critical thinking link to creativity?
Yes, I think it does. Absolutely. So in those higher order things from Bloom's taxonomy, critical thinking is all about the analysis and the evaluation. So it's very much around the definition stage of that design thinking. So I think having good information before you start the creativity bit, the ideation, is definitely something that you need to do as part of that design thinking process. Ideas don't come from thin air. You need some substance to base them on. So exploring and then being able to critically analyze that information will kick off that creative process.
So no eureka moment, Sally, or do you think that exists?
Oh yes, I totally think that exists. One of the things about that sort of design squiggle process is sometimes if you're pushing too hard to find an idea, to find something creative, it can actually really block you. So there is a well-known thing which is referred to as the creative pause, where if you're facing that block, you need to step back and stop pushing and actually just let those subconscious processes work away, because a lot happens in your brain that you're not necessarily conscious of. And those processes can tick away quite happily without you paying attention to them. And then somewhere from that pool of subconscious creativity, links will be made and something will pop into your conscious mind. And that, I think, is what explains the eureka moment.
Thank you so much. Any other questions from our viewers today? Fantastic. And while you are thinking of your last minute questions, I will plug that these short, quick lunchtime sessions are an opportunity to get a signposting. There's lots more I'm sure we could talk about on these topics. We have more skill sessions coming up. So if you go to the RGU website and click on the event section and then filter it for innovation, you'll find a bunch of them coming up. The next one, we have an enterprise skills next week on writing a shareholders agreement. So if you're already running a business and you've got your idea sorted, then we have some technical skills there. And then we have a session coming up in a few weeks' time in November, all about how you can experiment. So particularly those end bits, once you've done that ideation, what do you do with all of your ideas and how do you make sure they're working? Coming up very soon. So on that note, I'll thank Sally and thank everyone for coming along, and look forward to seeing you at an event sometime very soon. Enjoy the rest of your lunch break and we will speak to you later.